Everybody. Um, Obviously, if you're working on this now, you finished your parlay assignment on prison reform. Make sure after you do that you see me for guided notes to the next unit if you didn't get one already. So our next unit is going to be crime in America. We're going to spend the next couple days, I guess next couple weeks, looking at crime, types of crime, trends in crime, etc. In the United States, and compare it to the rest of the world. We know we've already kind of, you've already kind of looked at that a little bit in your parlay assignment, some of the data, some of the things that I had you guys read about how America and our prison system, more people are in prison in the United States than anywhere else in the world. So we'll kind of go through that. So crime in America is our unit. A couple little interesting little tidbits is that you have a crime that happens in the United States once every 22 seconds, violent crimes, and then you have every 3 seconds you have a property crime. So obviously, property crimes are the most common types of crimes, like burglary, for instance, um, robbery, um, things of that nature. Arson would be property crimes. Um, so you can kind of see that here. This is again more of a recent look, I guess. So I know the stats were a little bit off, but as of 2014, again, you see 26.3 seconds violence. You're looking at murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault. You see some of the stats for that. As of 2014. Then as of 2014, you have property crime. Again, a little bit more than what I just showed you guys. 3.8 seconds. So again, burglary, larceny, theft, motor vehicle theft are again are more common types of crimes. Now, crime is very cyclical, meaning kind of you have your ups and downs in terms of good times in the United States, times where crime rates really kind of soar up. You kind of saw that, and it gets more in the modern era, the Great Depression, World War II era, where crime will go down because of the New Deal. And men left for the war. So when World War II broke out, a lot of men were off fighting. A huge portion of our population is going to be off fighting the war. Plus, think back to your U.S. history, world history classes. Think of who's at home during the war having to pick up the slack and work in the factories, work longer hours. So crime's going to go down in between that Great Depression, World War II levels. Then we start getting into the 60s. The 60s, you have this huge surge in crime rates going in from the 60s and the 70s. Now, again, go back to your U.S. history classes, things that we've talked about. The 60s was a very crazy, very chaotic time. You have the civil rights movement. So let's start there. You have, Martin Luther King Jr. He was practicing this practice called civil disobedience, telling people to basically break laws that are unfair. Well, what laws What laws was he talking about? Jim Crow laws of the South, separate schools, separate drinking fountains, separate restaurants, separate spots in the bus. Things that were kept to separate white Americans from African Americans. So MLK, and Rosa Parks and that whole genre of people were saying, "Hey, let's break these unfair laws. Let's do it non-violently, but let's boycott, let's protest, let's march, let's do speeches, let's purposely break these laws." So that's just one element of the 60s. Then you have the hippie generation. You have the hippies that were the baby boomers that were now becoming teenagers in their 20s, and how they were very different from their parents and grandparents' generation. Their parents and grandparents were the World War II generation, the Great Depression generation. They grew up through the Depression, not having anything, going off to war, and all the sacrifices for a country that group made. And now you have this new baby boom generation, the hippie generation, that is like everything against what they stand for. They have their hair long. They believe in individualism, nonconformity to what society expects you to be. Um, let's drive around in our car and not get full-time jobs, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So you had that whole element going on. And then you had the Vietnam War, a big part of the 60s, and you had the protest movements that are going to ensue. And then you have political things, like the Democratic National Convention, where you have police and protesters clashing. So you get this huge surge in crime where President Nixon comes into power. You see this picture right here in 1968, where he promises, law and order, that we need to maintain justice, that we need to maintain our law and order as a country. Because then all these issues that you see here, anti-war movement, civil rights, drugs were a major problem, especially in the 60s and 70s. The war on drugs are going to ensue, and Nixon he gets elected because that's really his big, his big rallying cry. A lot of Americans were disgusted with where America was heading. They saw all these changes and they didn't like it by the younger generations. So you see that. So you get more emphasis on police, more on local issues, more wars on crime, more wars on drugs, and etc. That we need to combat to combat that. And we've seen these same things recently in the past 5 or 10 years with very similar issues that's what's going on in the 60s are happening today with politics, with political issues. You have race issues, police issues with community members. So we're dealing with some very similar things that that we dealt with in the 60s. All right, so what are some goals for the unit, things that I want you guys to really kind of grasp as we move in the next couple of weeks? One is, why do people commit crimes? Like, what is the reason for why people do what they do? What's it between them and a normal law-abiding citizen? We're going to tackle the nature versus nurture and other theories for why crimes are committed. So this is a big divide in the psychological community. Is nature is meaning that is it DNA related? Is it in our chemical blood, or is it in our blood or in our brain? The impulses that we get internally to commit crimes. Are we born to be a criminal? And then you have the nurture component. Talks more about like how you were raised, your sociological factors, your surroundings that might push you towards a life of crime. So we'll talk about that too. 3 is crime stats in the United States. Is crime getting better or is it getting worse? What makes regular criminals different from serial killers? So we'll touch on that with a little serial killer, mini unit that's in this unit here. We'll talk about what is a motive. What motivates people to commit crimes? What reasons do they present? Also, kind of going with the whole serial killer thing, going back to that, what is the difference between a serial killer, a spree murder, and a mass murder? What are some of the different characteristics of that? We'll show some examples of that as well as we move forward. And then, what are the characteristics of a serial killer? What's their profile? What are some commonalities that we find among serial killers? All right, so what I want you guys to do is on your guided notes. So all that we just did was not in your guided notes. So finally, what I want you guys to do and have this ready for tomorrow's class is I want you guys to kind of brainstorm on your own. You can use today, get homework, whatever you guys need to do, but try to create a little list. And what I want you guys to answer is ultimately let's see here. Identify reasons why people commit crimes. So think of the more social. Social, you're dealing with the environment, your surroundings, where you live, etc. Economic, obviously, kind of I think speaks for itself. So what would drive people here to commit crimes? And then biological, how your body, DNA. All those types of things. So try to create as many things as you can for reasons why people commit crimes in these 3 factors. So jot this in your guided notes and have this ready to go for tomorrow so we can kind of brainstorm and discuss this as a class. All right, so without further ado, that is it for today, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.